All right. Well, I'm here with Dr. Rebecca Bilbro. We are kicking off another round of the speaker series, which is running in parallel with the Women Who Code Fall Career Services event. So to provide an introduction to our next interview, Dr. Rebecca Bilbro is a data scientist. She's a Python and Go programmer, a teacher, a speaker, and an author. She works as a consulting engineer at Unisys, where she leads product teams in building data products through a blend of traditional machine learning techniques, NLP, and deep learning. Rebecca is also an active open source contributor, and she's the creator and maintainer of the Yellowbrick library, a Python package that extends scikit-learn and matplotlib to support feature analysis, model selection, and hyperparameter tuning. So Rebecca, welcome to the Women Who Code event stage as a participant in our fall speaker series. I wanted to kick off this conversation here around your development of Yellowbrick. So how did you first come to be involved in the project?
Thank you very much for having me here. And thank you also for asking about Yellowbrick. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm not sure how many of the people who are tuned in have encountered Yellowbrick before at work or at school or in other meetups. The library is between 4 and 5 years old now. It's been open source for over 4 years now. And it's something that I started writing with a colleague, Benjamin Bengfort, when I was sort of transitioning from teaching myself machine learning and learning how to do machine learning into being a teacher of machine learning. So it's something that I've been thinking about for a while. And kind of, it comes out of this experience of having to explain something very technical to yourself and try to understand what it is you are doing when you're doing something where there is a lot of representational mysticism. And machine learning is a prime candidate of that, where, as easy as it feels to use something like scikit-learn to build a predictive model and generate live predictions, the actual mechanics of what's going on under the hood in just a few lines of code packs a lot of complexity. And, if you're like me and, most of my students, you have a lot of curiosity about what's actually happening. And you have this intuition that understanding more about what's happening under the hood will actually allow you to achieve better model performance, which in fact is true. So there is kind of, a equal and opposite push in the opposite direction. I'm noticing a lot of people using tools that kind of do automated machine learning, where you kind of outsource those iterations to, essentially a bunch of virtual machines running different models in parallel. Yellowbrick sort of goes the other direction and says, well, what if we sort of understand what's happening a little bit better? What different decisions would we make? And how would those decisions help us get to higher performing models more quickly than what we would be able to get to if we just kind of threw more virtual compute resources at the problem?
Awesome. I really appreciate that detailed description for the value add of the Yellowbrick package. It's been really a pleasure to work with and to be able to provide visual diagnostics for the machine learning process. And we'll touch on, as we move through this interview, a bit more about how that works and what machine learning looks like. I just wanted to ask now, what advice you would give to a female developer who's looking to jumpstart or to jump into an open source project?
So I think that this is such an interesting time to be asking that question. There's kind of a, I don't know how much people kind of follow tech Twitter, but there's an ongoing, very kind of deep discussion that's happening right now in the open source Python community about underrepresented minorities in open source. And a lot of very big packages are being sort of confronted with, I think, valid criticism about, their history of engagement of underrepresented communities. And, also a lot of people are, talking through what their plans are, to get more people involved, to be more welcoming and more open. So this is a excellent time, I would say, if you are looking to get involved, there's a lot of projects right now who I think are really seeking different voices, unique perspectives. So the timing is great. So that's sort of, on a positive note, I think there's a lot of opportunity right now. If you're interested in getting involved in open source, you can there's a few people on, Twitter who are really kind of excellent amplifiers. So Safia is one of the kind of, leading voices in the open source, community, she's a underrepresented minority, but is a very important voice in the community. And she is sort of constantly amplifying projects. Map.lib is a project that's always seeking more projects, more contributors to the project. NumPy is a project that's an example of a project that's been historically mostly white men contributors, but that's made a huge effort recently to open up contributions. Scikit-learn is a package that does routine meetings that are designed to attract women and other underrepresented minorities to be contributors to Scikit-learn. Yellowbrick is a great place to come to contribute if you're interested. So there's a lot of great packages out there. I would say, the tough thing is that it's hard to make time to build open source if it's something you're doing in addition to your full-time job and your home responsibilities, and just, taking care of yourself and, staying, staying healthy, sleeping enough and taking care of yourself. So doing all of those things is a lot. I think the best possible thing, the best scenario, I think, is figuring out how to negotiate at your job for being able to allot some amount of time towards open source. And I guarantee you that your job uses open source a lot and is making, somehow in the way that they're making money, they are leveraging open source. And so for that reason, I think you can make the case that it makes sense for you to be able to spend, some amount of your time, 5% of your time, however much of your time contributing back to open source, and carving out some of that time, some work time to be doing that, so that you don't have to take time away from taking care of yourself, being with friends and family, sleeping, and those kinds of things. So I think that would be my advice. I think it's a great time to get involved. Try to do it in a way that won't end in feeling kind of depleted. But it's a very rewarding way to give back. And in some sense, we are all making use of open source. And so, I think that figuring out some way to give back is, a little bit like the, civic duty of somebody who is leveraging these packages in the wild.
Thank you. That's such a valuable strategy for how to allocate your time, shift a few of your work hours into contributing to these important projects. And I'm just so grateful to have you here, Rebecca, as part of this conversation so that we can speak about the depth of your background in this open source world and also some of your experience in machine learning and also as a teacher. I will just take a quick pause for a second to plug Twitter, given that this was an important element of your response to that question. So you can find Rebecca Bilbro on Twitter at Rebecca Bilbro, and you can find Women Who Code DC at their handle, which is also simply just Women Who Code DC. So perhaps following this video, we can use the Women Who Code platform in order to tweet out some of these bios that you mentioned and help people find interesting projects that they can get working on. So taking just a step back, if you have questions for Rebecca Bilbro in the audience, please make sure that you're submitting them via the Slido platform, and we will post the link to Slido in the sidebar of YouTube Live so that she can also address your questions as well. Okay, so Rebecca, how would you describe machine learning to somebody who's unfamiliar with this term?
It's a good question. So there's a lot of complexity in machine learning, but if you had to kind of give the elevator pitch for why machine learning is valuable, how it can help us, how it can help society and everyday people, the answer is that there are a lot of decisions that get made and work that gets done in a very routine way. So kind of very routine decisions where you can, you end up with this trail of a lot of decisions that have been made and kind of the input that went into making those decisions and the outcomes of those decisions. And in the end, a lot of those decisions are fairly low-level decisions. And the person who's burdened with making these decisions, or the team that's burdened with making these decisions, is unable to move on to kind of higher order decision making or thought processes because they are kind of inundated with a lot of tedious decisions that they have to make over and over and over. So kind of, let's say, we're inspecting apples, they're coming down a conveyor belt, and really all we have to do is look at them and make sure there's not a bruise on them, and they kind of pass by. So imagine kind of this sort of conveyor belt where the people who are, inspecting these apples could be asking much deeper questions, or kind of developing more, more useful solutions. But because they are, having to kind of make these decisions, these very small decisions over and over and over, we're sort of blocked from moving on to these higher order things. So the goal of machine learning is to look at a historic snapshot of a bunch of these decisions that have been made and the input that went into making these decisions, and to see if it's possible to train an algorithm to learn the feature space of the information that's going into making these decisions, and learn a relationship between those features and the actual outcome of the decision that has been made. And in some cases, this is possible. It's not possible in all cases. But in the cases where it is possible, it can be very effective to train an algorithm to learn those patterns. And then you can implement some kind of automated decision-making process moving forward. And you can even integrate features into that algorithm in the future so that when the algorithm makes mistakes, it can learn to do a better job the next time.
Sounds great. That was a really excellent kind of end-to-end summary of machine learning, maybe some active learning as well. Some really important techniques in the field of data science. So if you're somebody who is just learning about these terms and you're trying to decide where you might slot yourself, you're interested in learning more about tech fields, but you're not sure if really data science is right for you, what qualities, in your opinion, make someone well suited to enter a career in data science machine learning?
So that's a very interesting question. I think that there are a lot of different paths into data science, especially now, potentially in 15 or 20 years, it will be a more kind of traditional discipline, kind of like how we see something like computer science or statistics now.
Mm.
But right now, there is a lot of flexibility, and there are a lot of different paths that lead into data science. I will say that I think that the people who kind of enjoy being a data scientist the most are people who just really enjoy figuring things out. So people who don't mind when each new problem that they're given is not straightforward. So if you're somebody who kind of likes figuring things out, whether that's kind of, figuring, like you get a new kind of cell phone and you're figuring out how to make it work, or, you like to pick up new hobbies and figure out how to do something like, how do I play the ukulele, or how does this rollerblading thing work? So if you're the kind of person who's always kind of picking up new things and kind of enjoys exploring new things, data science has a lot of those features. There are techniques that are consistent or have some consistency from project to project in data science, but a lot of it is just figuring out how to figure something out. So it's about, it is a family of problem solving, but sort of a family of problem solving where part of the problem is to define what the problem actually is. I have met a lot of different data scientists who have come from a lot of different backgrounds, who have that, approach, who enjoy, who have that kind of curiosity. And so I don't think that it's a specific skill set in particular that pre-qualifies you to be a data scientist. I will say there are some skills that will make your job easier if you do decide to become a data scientist. So I think that understanding how to write reusable code is a very helpful skill to have, because it will allow you to automate some of the boring things so that you don't get stuck doing sort of some of the tedious tasks of that are involved in collecting and transforming data. There's a lot of repeatable things that you can do. So figuring out how to write good quality reusable code is a great skill. Having a feel for statistics and linear algebra, so kind of having an intuition about what's happening when you multiply two matrices together, for example, or what's actually happening to a curve when you take the derivative of it, or something like that. So developing those kinds of intuitions is helpful. And honestly, knowing how to communicate with people and ask questions and ask people what problem they want you to solve, I would say is another kind of big part of it. So being able to talk to domain experts, ask questions that elicit meaningful responses so that you can figure out how to define the problem. I think those are some of the key skills.
Sounds good. A lot of that really resonates in terms of what's useful in the day-to-day data science work. So in terms of where to go from here, what advice would you give to somebody who is preparing for a new job?
Well, I started a new job 3 or 4 months ago. And I think that maybe my main advice is that, each new job is an opportunity to meet new people who are really good at something, who really know a lot about something. And it's an opportunity for you to introduce the things that you know how to do to those people. And so you end up with this potential to collaborate with a lot of new people. So when you're starting a new job, I would say pick a job where you feel like your opportunities to collaborate are going to be maximized, where you're the most excited to work with people who are, in that organization, where there are people that you've talked to, and when they interviewed you and asked you questions, you felt that sort of spark of mutual curiosity. So I think that's one thing. Starting a new job also, involves kind of the the logistics of pay and, being, compensation and equity sometimes, and those kinds of things. And so, starting a new job is also about making sure that you are valuing your skill set. And sometimes that involves talking to people who are not at that job, talking to people who are in a similar industry to you, and figuring out what the market value of your skills is, so you can kind of be prepared to negotiate if necessary. And I think, creating an opportunity to learn some new things, right? So getting involved in projects that will push you to learn a new skill. So whether that's a new programming language that you might have to learn in order to be successful at the new organization, learning about a new data domain that you'll have to understand in order to be successful. So I think, kind of creating a little bit of pressure so that you will enter a space where there's a world of new things to learn, and kind of a guarantee for growth.
Really great advice around how to collaborate effectively, how to find a new role that'll push yourself. And I'm sure that our community will be really grateful to leverage this as they're looking ahead at their options coming out of an event like this. So with that, I'd like to turn now to some questions from the audience. And if you have a question for Rebecca, make sure you submit it via Slido. So first up here, what questions from teaching do you bring into coding?
Oh, that's interesting. So I think one of the things that's become challenging as a teacher is that we're teaching via Zoom now, and not in person. And I am so used to looking in my students' faces for kind of the glimmer of recognition, or kind of that click moment where something I've said, or the way that I've said something, has had a impact, and they are starting to understand something that felt obscure before. But that is, a very important part of teaching, right? Teaching is not a one-way thing, right? It's a conversation between the teacher and the student. And I would say that coding is not a one-way conversation either. I think that one of the misnomers of code is that it's like writing, writing something that's sort of static, that's job is just to get something done. Like, it's just, you're writing this code just so that it'll generate this model, or just so that it'll generate this plot. But the code that you write is part of a conversation, and it's a conversation that you might be having with future you, who has to go back and look at that code and figure out what the heck you were trying to say in the past. Or it might be a conversation that you're having with a coworker, with a future maintainer, somebody who's going to pick up your code and maintain it, somebody who's going to pick up your code and integrate it into a bigger project. So kind of thinking about the code that you're writing as part of a dialogue, as always a part of a dialogue, even if you're just writing it for yourself. You're writing, a journal entry to future you. And it's not just about having code that's executable. It's about, saying, when I wrote this, it occurred to me that I actually, there's maybe a few different ways to solve this that might be more efficient. And maybe you don't have time to implement those right now, but you can write it in a little inline comment to yourself as a to-do. And then, 6 months later, when you're searching through and you see that to-do, you'll say, oh, right, I was gonna see if I could speed this up. This might be a good time for that. Or maybe you pass it to your coworker who, really likes tinkering and trying to speed things up, and that'll be a trigger for her or for him to figure out how they might be able to integrate their skill set into what you've done. So it's just like teaching, coding is a conversation.
Fabulous. I love that metaphor. Really helpful. All right, next up, what do you think that companies who have the desire to bring in a diverse skill set, do you think that these companies, they're looking to increase the diversity of their workforce? Do they have the resources that are allocated appropriately into making these environments within tech truly inclusive?
So there's a lot of variation from company to company. I've worked in a lot of organizations, from organizations where it was a team of 5 people up to organizations where it was, 5,000 people. And you do see that, the size of the company tends to correlate with, at least how much of a resource they have around attracting high quality candidates, attracting people who have interesting different backgrounds, different approaches to solving problems. There is probably an inflection point where once a company gets big enough, they are a little bit, sometimes going through the motions and kind of putting people through kind of a generic hiring process. I think you can usually tell, right, during the hiring process if it's a generic experience, and they're not giving you very much opportunity to show off what you're really good at. It's usually not a great sign. Whatever that might be, whatever it is you're really good at, if their hiring process doesn't showcase your skills, there's a good chance that the job also will not give you a chance to kind of showcase what really makes you special as a contributor to that organization. So I think you can usually tell fairly early on, and it's not going to be in the words that they say, right? Because everybody has memorized the correct words to say when they're hiring candidates. It's really going to be in their actions and kind of how they're engaging with you, how they're giving you the opportunity to show off what you really have to bring to the table. So potentially that has, that may have some relationship with the company's resources and the trainings that their HR staff has gone through. But usually it has more to do with who is already there. So if their workforce is already diverse, if their workforce is, already filled with people who have a lot of different ideas and different ways of solving problems, that will show up in the interview from the very beginning in the interview process, and you'll know right away.
All right, great. Some really good advice for folks as they go about the interview process coming out of this experience. So I just like to switch gears and ask kind of a fun question as we close things out, and then I'll give you the opportunity to share any remaining last piece of wisdom that you would like to with the group. But first, have you made any fun quarantine discoveries? And by that, I mean an activity or a pastime that you would not have ordinarily engaged in, but that you've been enjoying during this strange period?
Oh, what a great question. So I don't know if this counts as a pastime, but there's a park right next to my house. And one of the things that I, have to do much more intentionally, in the sense that I have to set an alarm on my phone to remind me to do this. I have to remind myself to get up off of my chair, out of my desk, and go outside and walk around this park a couple times a day. And so I'll go and do a quick loop. And there is a groundhog that lives in this park. And this groundhog is always, maybe he's there 70% of the time. And so I've sort of grown to, walk past and kind of look for him, which is not something that I think I would have even I don't think I would have even noticed the fauna that was living in my area before this. But now that, my interactions, my real life IRL interactions are so limited, I've started noticing things like that, and not just the groundhog. who I have affectionately named Murray after Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, just so that everybody knows. But not just the groundhog, but also the rabbits and the squirrels and some of these these animals that just live in this park and are kind of my co-inhabitants of this space. I notice them a lot more than I ever would have before.
It's a really delightful answer. Yeah, it's so true, the way that that nature can replenish us and re-energize us. And I love your point. That's a great tip too, about having a reminder, a designated time to go and take care of ourselves and take these breaks. I think that's so important for everybody who works in tech. Okay, so with that, I just want to close out with a couple of words about Women Who Code, and then we'll return to Rebecca for a last piece of wisdom. So if you're just joining us today, Women Who Code is an organization that has 70 plus chapters all around the world. This event is sponsored by the DC chapter, and like every Women Who Code organization, we are really focused on empowering women in technology. We offer coding resources, leadership opportunities, and great events like this one today. So now I'm going to return to Rebecca for anything else that she'd like to share as we wrap up this interview.
So I think that maybe, one parting piece of wisdom that I feel like I discovered later in life than I would have liked is that tech is a creative space. I think that people who work outside of tech and even people who work inside of tech think that we are just, churning out code and widgets and machines, and that it's this sort of very dry, clinical space where things are very obvious and it's just about checking things off a list and putting things together and shipping them. But that's not true at all. This is a space of creativity. It's a place where if you have sort of an artistic mindset and if you have the heart of an artist, and if you feel like you're a creator and a maker, that is sort of what makes people in tech shine and really kind of powerful contributors to projects. People who see themselves as a creator and somebody who has a voice and something to say, and kind of a personal take on things. So do not feel that you have to silence that in order to be successful in tech, because what I have observed in my career is that it's exactly the opposite. The best tech is the tech that is created by people who respect themselves as creators and thinkers, independent thinkers, and thought leaders, and people who have something to express to the world.
Thank you. Great encouragement to everybody to go out and put their unique voice into the world. So with that, we will pause on the interviews for a little while, let everybody return to their one-on-one meetups. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your advice with the community. It's been really valuable to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks.
Good luck, everyone.